Daith da, how we doing? Welcome to podcast number 21. I hope you're all well. I'm alright now, but I was a bit wished over the weekend actually. I caught this 24-hour sickness bug off mother, and I was a bit rough. I can imagine father looking down at me and saying, "You're like a dying duck in a thunderstorm." But I was all better again by Monday, but 'twas not too good there for a little while. So for my week this week, I've been, Glyn Valley every day, and I thought perhaps that gave me the idea to talk about perhaps cremations from when I started, going on to different ways that you can scatter ashes or whatever. So that's what it's going to be today. I know when you saw the title, I thought a lot of it was open that I'd be singing David Bowie's Ashes to Ashes, but I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. I would reckon these days 80% of the funerals that we conduct are cremation, whereas when I started it was about 50-50 with cremation and burial. And also back then as well, Penmount Crematorium in Truro was the only crematorium in Cornwall, and then Glyn Valley opened the end of 1989, but it did take a couple of years for Glyn Valley to get established, really, because we were dealing with families where their families had already had cremations and services down at Penmount. So it did take a few years for it to change. But I would say definitely nearly all of the services we do now are at Glyn Valley, because it's only, 6-7 miles away from us. I would say we perhaps go Penmount a couple times a month, but, that's 25 mile away. But we still do it a little bit. And you've now also got Treswithian Crematorium down at Camborne. We don't go there too often, perhaps 2 or 3 times a year, if that. So that's pretty much how our funerals are split. Also, another thing that has changed is back then, years ago, all your funerals were pretty much religious. So quite often you would have a service in church first and then just go to the crematorium for the committal. But as the years have gone on, more and more services now are perhaps non-religious. So we're going straight to the crematorium. Down at Penmount, they've got 2 chapels. Trelawney's the big chapel, which seats just over 100. And then Curnow on the side, I think it's about 60, I think. And like I said, when I started with Father, that was the only crematorium in Cornwall. And I might have mentioned it before, but if you had a service perhaps out St Minver Rock in a church, and then you had to go in the summer down to Penmount, it was half a day, because none of the towns or villages had bypasses. And in fact, we did learn fairly early on that in the height of the summer traffic, once we got on St Colin bypass to Trekennan roundabout, we then turn right and then a sharp left down past Trebedanan and right the way through to Gummo Shop until we come out at Mitchell. And taking the cortege that way, it saved you a lot of time queuing, and it meant that you safely got to the crematorium for your allotted time. Back then, the services in the chapels were every 40 minutes. So they wouldn't be, so say perhaps you'd have 11 o'clock at Trelawney, 11:40 at Curnow, that sort of thing. And they were pretty much fully booked every day. Now the services are every hour, which gives you more time. The same as Glyn Valley. When Glyn Valley started first, it was every 45 minutes, but then they changed it to every hour as well. So it does give you a bit more time. It gives people a chance to just speak to friends and relatives when they come out of the chapels. Also back then, something which was quite common in both Penmount and Glyn Valley when it started was that you'd have rota ministers, which would be retired vicars, and to earn a little extra money, they would ring up the families. They wouldn't actually go and see them because quite often they could be 20 mile away. Just get a gist of, what the family wanted for the service, some notes for the eulogy, and they would actually do the services down there. And there were some very good ones there, I must admit. There was one vicar I remember, pretty much most of them, they would charge their their fee and also travelling. And there was one vicar I do remember, he would sometimes do 3 or 4 services a day in the chapel. And what we didn't find out for a long time after was that he would charge us travelling. Well, that was okay. And then he'd go and sit up in the car park and have his sandwich. And then he'd charge you travelling for the next one. Go back and have a cup of coffee in his car and charge you travelling for the next one. So he was quite cute, really. But that was something that did die out when the church encouraged its vicars to do more services, so that they was really involved with people of the towns and the villages who know them, and hopefully making it a bit more personal. So, as I said, in 1989, Glyn Valley opened. I can remember Mehdi come round I say the difference between Penmount and Glyn Valley is that Penmount's run by Cornwall Council and Glyn Valley's run by a private company. And the company, it's changed hands over the years with buyouts and management buyouts and whatever. But I can remember Mehdi come round with the plans when they was going to build Glyn Valley, and he was some chuffed, really. I remember him coming in the office and saying to Father, we got a lovely chapel here. We'll be able to sit 30 people, maybe 40 at the most. And you could see the shock on Father's face. And he said, well, what's wrong with that? So Father said, well, a lot of our Cornish families, we start counting at about 60. So they went away, they did revise the plans a bit, and when Glyn Valley initially opened, it did seat 60, with room for standing at the back for, I'd say, about 10 or so. And then over the years, they did change the seats, so the numbers went down to 45, but now they've changed again, and they're up to 60 again now. One feature that Glyn Valley and Troswithian both have is that they've both got fantastic picture windows. If you go down Troswithian, 'tis on your left-hand side as you're sitting there, and 'tis looking over the beautiful countryside. I know Phil Trevina would prefer it if 'twas looking over Camborne, but you can't have everything. And at Glyn Valley, it's there right in front of you, fantastic window. And we always do warn vicars or new celebrants when they've taken a service that don't worry if sometimes the mourners, the congregation, look distracted. And the main reason for that is in the summertime, you've got the Bodmin and Wentford Steam Railway, the train goes along the bottom of the field. So it's almost like a slow motion Wimbledon effect where all the heads turn from right to left in slow motion, and the vicar, the celebrant's thinking, what the hell's going on here? They ain't listening to me, but 'tis watching the steam train go across the bottom, which is a lovely sight. Another funny story that comes to mind with that window was many years ago now, our dear old friend, Reverend Alan Wainwright. Lovely chap, very good friends with Father. A lot of you might remember him. He was a vicar, retired vicar, lived up at Pendoggett, and they ran the Cornish Arms there, the pub, but also he did a lot of services in Delian Church, Port Isaac, wherever, but also he did a lot of services at Glyn Valley. And I remember one day, I can't remember exactly what he was saying because my religion knowledge isn't quite like it used to be, but he was kind of saying that our soul or the dearly departed would be raised up, and he raised his arms. And exactly as the time when he did that, there was a helicopter. He couldn't see it because it was behind him in the field over the edge, down the bottom of the field there at Glyn Valley. This helicopter appeared from nowhere, and he just couldn't understand everybody, the looks on their faces as he was saying this. And this helicopter, wow, it was priceless. You couldn't have timed it better, really. Actually, 'tis a good job that I'm got a camera here, because I looked a right prune then, because while I'm trying to describe the helicopter rising up from behind the edge, I'm actually raising my arms here. I'm trying to demonstrate what it looked like, so I'm glad you can't see what I'm doing. And another fantastic sight, we've had quite a few lately, that you see looking out that window is some of the most fantastic rainbows. And some of them have appeared right at the beginning of the committal, and then as the curtain have closed, they've gone again, quite eerie, really. And a few weeks ago now, I was asked to read a poem for a dear family friend of ours. Well, like kind of all Cornish families, we're all related really, dear Shani. And I had to read a poem, Look for Me in Rainbows. And I know that I always think of her now when I see they rainbows there out of that window. Fantastic sight. So, as I said, the services now at the crematoriums, they mo hour apart. Say our funeral was 11:30, we'd be allowed in the chapel, say, about 11:15, just to put out the orders of service, check the music's all okay. Service then started at 11:30. It shouldn't be any longer than half hour, which then gives the family about 15 minutes outside to talk to everyone before we drift away so that we don't interfere with the next funeral. So at Glyn Valley, you've got different time slots as well. In the early morning, between 8 and 8:30 are the times. It's every 5 minutes, which are the services that they call direct funerals. And I would say we do 2 to 3 of these a week now, where we just go ourselves. It's where no one attends. We go there with our hearse, always take the hearse. And I think that's the good thing with all your local undertakers, is that they go to the local crematoriums. You do see these other big companies up country that advertise on the telly. Well, they would take the person up country, but we would obviously always use the local crematorium. So if you see us leaving early in the morning, that's where we're going, and that's between 8 and 8:30. And then at 9 o'clock, you've got a slot which is called an attended direct funeral, and that's only 10 minutes long. You're allowed up to about a dozen people, but it just allows you, if you want to go in, just have a little bit of music, perhaps somebody say a few words, and then a bit more music. And then the proper full services, they start at 9:30. And I say these services, it's every hour then, 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, right the way through. And this is still, well, by far the most popular service, where you have a proper, a full service. And just to show you how popular they are, with the crematoriums have been booked up 3 to 4 weeks ahead, since Christmas. So it's still the most popular one, where any number of people can go and you do have a full service. One thing that did change services a lot was COVID. And I think that's where, the popularity of the direct services did increase a bit, because you were restricted to numbers you were allowed anyway. But also another thing was that you weren't allowed to sing hymns anymore. And I know obviously more services aren't religious now anyway, but they've still got organ at Treswithian and in the chapels at Penmount. But at Glyn Valley, they had a refurbishment a few months ago now, so the organ has been taken out. So if you want hymns, you can sing along to recorded music. The one thing that has allowed is that they can now get those extra seats in. So that's how they've managed to get up to the 60 seats. When I started first, all the music was played on the organ. As you went in, as the curtain closed, as you went out, and the hymns was all played by the organ. And then gradually CDs came in, and they was a little bit hit and miss really. If you had a bought-in CD, then that would usually work on the machine. But if you burnt one off, the format, it wouldn't always work. So it was a bit touch and go. And what they've actually got now in all the crematoriums are these systems. It's a company from outside that's installed their own machines. They got the software and everything. So what you do, we actually order the music online ourselves. And as long as it's been released somewhere in the world on some sort of format, then they can, 9 times out of 10, they can get it. They're really spot on. Sometimes if families see a tune on YouTube, we can't always get that because it's not always an official version, and with copyright and everything, that's the one time that perhaps, we have to say to families, look, we can't actually do that version, so we, have a rethink. Another thing that have come in popular since COVID is live streaming. So if people can't make it, they can actually watch the service live, or the company do charge a little bit extra to give you the option that you can then watch it over the following 28 days. So if somebody up country or wherever was working on a particular day, or even abroad, and it's the wrong time of the day, then they can actually watch it over the following 28 days. And the company also offers the option of then having a copy of the service on either a USB stick or a DVD, something like that. And another option they've brought in is that you can have a visual tribute during the service, where you choose a piece of music. You can have 25, 50 or more photographs. So they've got a big TV screen in the chapels, and you can actually sit and watch these photos, and they edit it so that they're spaced ideally for the music from the beginning to the end. And that's becoming more popular as well. With all the crematoriums in Cornwall, at the commit or at the farewell, you've got the option whether you want the coffin to stay there on display for you to just go as you leave the chapel later, go up to it one last time, or for the curtain to come around. And traditionally, always in the past, the curtain come around. I would say now it's about 50-50. But even if the curtain closes, the coffin actually stays where it is. Some people think, oh, crumbs, does it trundle away? Do you hear anything? But the coffin stays where it is, and then the curtain comes around. And then when we all leave the chapel, that's when, the coffin then gets moved. I know there's always a lot of myths about cremation. You hear the stories that they wait till the end of the day and every coffin gets cremated together and then the ashes are shared out. But none of that's true. They're very strict with everything. You've got 2 cremators at Glyn Valley that will only physically take one coffin at the time. So that's how we can guarantee that when you get the ashes back, it is definitely that person's ashes and nobody else's. And another thing you may have noticed, when we turn up at the crematorium, the first thing that happens, we lift the lid of the boot of the hearse, and the verger who's on duty that day will come over to the coffin. And you might think, well, what's on there? Well, what they're doing is checking the nameplate. And it's brilliant, really, because everything is so strict. If there's a spelling mistake, or which there never is, but they will always check the correct spelling, the date of death and the age. And if there was anything wrong, then they wouldn't, permit the cremation to carry on. So it is reassuring that everything is checked. And then when the cremation takes place, everything gets cremated. The handles have got to be combustible, so everything gets cremated. And then we can get the ashes from the next day. Down at Penmount, you don't need bearers if you don't want them. They use the catafalque actually comes out. At Glyn Valley, pretty much, they've got a motorised bier, but nearly all the time the coffin's carried in. And I would say 50% of the time it's our bearers, and the other half is where family or friends would like to carry the coffin. And I know I've had a couple of times, I always like to brief the bearers before to tell them what's happening. And on a couple of times, I've had the bearers looking at me once I finished talking to them, and I think, hang on, have I said something wrong? And I said, oh, everything all right? And they said, well, you haven't finished yet. You've told us about when we're carrying the coffin in, but when do we carry it out again? And I have to explain to them that, look, tin quite like a church here. Once you carry into the crematorium, you don't carry out again. We've had lots of different experiences there at the time. I can remember once 'twas blowing a gale, 'twas a force 10 wind, and the tiles was flying off the roof. And I think we just had our funeral done. We were the first ones in the morning, and then the crematorium was shut for the rest of the day because 'twas just too dangerous. The tiles was going here, there, and everywhere. And I also remember twice it's happened where either the main mourner or one of the main mourners or a bearer, they've come down, they've perhaps wore shoes that they haven't wore for 10 years, and the soles have come away from the rest of the shoe. And I know the first time that this happened, I said to the chap, what do we want to do? So we decided, I went into the office and we got their sellotape, and we got a roll of sellotape, and we just wrapped the sellotape around his shoes so that we stuck the top to the sole. So that was quite funny. The other chap, he didn't want to do that. He said it would be fine. But unfortunately, he was a bearer. And when he was walking, he was having to lift his leg because he didn't want to trip over the sole. And so he was kind of carrying. It was almost like a Monty Python, one of the funny walks that they would do. And I must admit that was quite interesting to watch. We don't have alcohol very often at a funeral. Perhaps you do a little bit where people raise a toast. I know we've had little glasses of champagne there on the table at the front where everyone's been asked at the end to raise a glass. And I remember many years ago now, lady, she had a carrier bag with her. Didn't realise at the time, but she had her tins of special brew in there. And of course, one fell over. It was opened, fell over during the service. And then when she went to go out, honestly, the chapel, it did smell like a brewery. And I remember the verger at the time, she had quite a frantic job to try and get rid of that smell. And that actually does remind me, I'm going back, must be 30 years or more now. When we was over Bridgend, for a while, the flat up above was empty. And I persuaded Father to let me store my own brew up there. Now, I was, a pauper at the time, quite tight. So rather than buy proper bottles to put the own brew in, I persuaded Mike Harvey. Ours was on the milk round at the time, so I got some old Corona bottles off him. I don't know if you can remember the Corona bottles. You used to give them back and you've had a deposit. So Harv's give me a few of these Corona bottles. Well, of course, they was upstairs in the flat. And what happened was, over one weekend, a few of them had exploded. And they just seeped down through the floorboards and just before the entrance to the chapel there. So if you come in, Father come in first thing Monday morning, Christ, he was rampant. It smelt terrible. And that was my job to get rid of that smell, because we had a family coming in the afternoon. And I thought I'd successfully done it. Father wasn't quite so sure. But what made my day was that the family, when they come in, they was running a bit late, and when they come in, they said, "Sorry, Mr. Bray, we got carried away. We've been over the Swan," and they didn't notice it anyway. So that's one thing that I'll remember about my own brew days. As far as music goes, anything goes really, and I think over the past few years, humour also has come into funerals a little bit. So you can imagine some of the choices of music that we've had involving fire, Ring of Fire, that sort of thing, which does give people a little bit of a smile. And also, I remember back in the early days when we had the CDs and we had Elton John, Candle in the Wind, and I'd given the chap the CD, so he was playing it, but the people was taking a little bit longer to get out of the chapel than we thought. And I'm there and it's getting to the end of the song, and then I think, crumbs, I know what the next song is on the album. And it's I'm Still Standing. I thought, we can't have that playing. So I whipped round and I just got him. When the song was finishing, I said, we'll fade it out now. I think it could have raised a few smiles there, I must admit. So then as far as the ashes go, like I say, we can get the ashes from the following day. At the crematoriums, they've got gardens of remembrance where they've got a lawned area that is unmarked. So if you want your ashes left there, they can always take you exactly where they are, but there isn't a memorial, or they do have, private graves and everything, that rose bushes, that sort of thing. Or you can bring them back to put in a churchyard or a cemetery, or quite a lot of people do scatter ashes these days. When we get the ashes back from the crematorium, these days they come back in a coloured cardboard box with the certificate inside, just to say that 'tis definitely the right ashes. And I think they've gone down the route of the cardboard box, being environmentally friendly. Years ago, it was always a plastic. Well, it looked like a burgundy sweet jar sort of thing that the ashes would come back in. And I remember a funny story. A chap came in once. He was the executor, and he came in to pick up the ashes. He said, "I'm going to scatter them then." I said, "Oh, okay." So anyway, we only found out a couple of days later he'd actually scattered them in the Camel in the river here at Wadebridge. But what he'd done then, instead of perhaps bringing the container back to us or disposing of it properly, he just screwed the top on and aved the container in the river. Well, of course, the tide comes in twice a day at Wadebridge, and a couple of days later, somebody was walking along a river bank and saw this container floating up on the bank. So they actually brought it in to us, and then we were able to take it back to the crematorium. if you wanted to scatter the ashes, they usually get put in what's known as a scatter tube now, which is a tube. It's usually got a lovely picture design on, and then you just take off the top, and then you can scatter out of the hole in the top. If the ashes are buried here in a churchyard or a cemetery, we usually put them in an oak casket with an engraved nameplate on. Or you can get these urns that, if you want, some people keep the ashes on the mantelpiece or keep them for, forever. So you can get these ornate urns that you can put them in. There's no real law, I don't think, for scattering ashes. Always, if you're going to scatter them on somebody's land, you must always ask permission. And also, if you were to scatter them in a river or lake, it is always wise to just speak to the environmental agency first. After that, over the last few years, there's been lots and lots of different options as well for ashes. You get companies, we just send a little bit of the ashes away and they can make them into jewellery, or other firms, they do actually little lockets where you just unscrew the top and you can just put a few ashes in there. That's another thing that's got quite popular. Another option these days is they can actually be put into fireworks. So you just put some of the ashes into a rocket and then you have a firework display where the ashes are kind of dispersed. And also another thing you can have is where you put the ashes in a kind of a paper mache sort of container that then you perhaps float out to sea. And then gradually after a few minutes, as the container gets wet, then the ashes just, sift out of the bottom like into the sea. That's another option. I've seen up country, there's a company that have got a drone and the ashes are put in there and then it goes up into the sky and then dispersed. Or if you want to go a bit further than that, there is a company that will actually send the ashes into outer space. I think it's a kind of a hydrogen filled balloon, and this balloon goes up about 100,000 feet. And then when it's ready, it's got a scatter vessel that releases the ashes and they spread, I think they go all over the globe. And there's cameras on board so you can actually watch the ascent of the balloon and then watch the ashes as they're released. So all the time there's new ideas coming up of how to, to scatter ashes or whatever. And I know other things. I think it started in Hawaii. They call them, I think it's paddle outs, I think they're called, with surfers. And I know that I'm sure they've done it down Poles F before. So if there's a surfer, perhaps they all paddle out on their surfboards. They make a little circle and then perhaps they do a few readings or whatever. And then they scatter the ashes in the sea there. So there's loads of different ways. And when you think you've seen it all, something else comes up. But I have to admit, not everyone always picks their ashes up for one reason or another. And like all undertakers, we've got at our Chapel of Rest containers of ashes. Well, I think the oldest container we've got is going back to 1973. I wouldn't be surprised if we've got over 200 containers there, to be honest. And whether people have been meaning to pick them up and they've forgotten, or whether they couldn't face it, I don't know. Some people, we're keeping them until the partner passes away so we know what's happening there. But I know after a few years, if you've tried getting hold of the next of kin and you can't get hold of them, you can take them back to the crematorium. But I think, like a lot of other undertakers, we always still keep them, because I'd be gutted if I went to go and get my relatives' ashes to be told, oh no, they've gone back to the crematorium. So you're always hopeful that a family member is going to come forward at some time and see her, what happened to Granddad's ashes or something, and then you can reunite them with the family. But a lot of people are quite surprised with this, but it is a common thing throughout the country. So there we go. I think that'll be it for this week. Sorry, it's been a bit longer this week. I've rambled on a bit, and I hope it hasn't been too morbid, really. But I thought in and out I might just put these little podcasts in. I know people do ask me to do little bits on information about different options and everything. So I hope it have been helpful today. And I think the word I'll finish with today, the Cornish word I think I'll go for, seeing we've been talking about the window at Glyn Valley and at Tresswithian, is the Cornish word for window, which is fenester. So there we go. Well, I hope you have a good week. I'll speak to you next week, and I wish you well. Do Guinness.